Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to chapter 34. Oh my gosh, chapter 34 of 3 books. We are officially engaged together, locked and loaded, me and you and our guests, on a 15-year epic quest to uncover and discuss the 1,000 most formative books in the world. We have flown all the way down to Key West, Florida, where we sat down in her bookstore, her Books and Books bookstore, with the one and only Judy Blume back in chapter 6. We have gone all the way back to catching Angie Thomas in Toronto, my hometown, on her book tour for On the Come Up, the incredible follow-up to her huge blockbuster successful book, The Hate You Give, back in chapter 26, and most recently, we've headed down to Philadelphia, where we got to hang out with the rapper Lush Life, who is also the author of the incredible children's book, P is for Pterodactyl. Yes, we are going high and low, near and far, left and right, east and west, all over the place, as best as we can, and as best as we can get to sit down with interesting and inspiring people to ask them which 3 books most shaped their lives. We are doing all the conversations live and in person, where I come out of one ear, the guest comes out of the other. We drop each chapter on the exact minute of every single new moon and every single full moon. We are 100% ad-free, commercial-free, sponsor-free, interruption-free. We got nothing else going except the conversation, because we just care about the books. We care about the art. We care about putting something beautiful out into the world. That's all we're trying to do. And today, I got something beautiful to share with all of you. It is a really, really fun conversation with the one and only Jim Levine. Who is Jim Levine? Well, Jim Levine is my literary agent, but not just my literary agent. He's also Tom Brady's literary agent, and Ray Dalio's literary agent, and Dan Ariely's literary agent, because he founded a literary agency. Jim Levine is the founder of LGR Literary Agency in New York City. Before I get into the literary agency, who's Jim? Well, Jim is this incredibly, deeply thoughtful, intentional guy who I've just come to adore over the years, as well as pretty much everyone else I talk to in the entire books industry. Jim is really well known. I have friends who have Jim as literary agency who call him their Yoda, their guiding force, their guiding spirit. What is this so special about this guy? Well, Jim has spent most of his career putting together ideas, people, and money. He identifies, nurtures, and markets talent. He creates projects that make a difference in the world. Before establishing his own agency, LGR Literary Agency, in 1989, he taught at Wellesley College and spent almost a decade as vice president at the Bank Street College of Education in New York, where he developed a wide range of books, magazines, audio, video, and software products. He thinks of being an agent as a continuing liberal arts education, an opportunity to engage with experts and thought leaders in a wide variety of fields and help shape their work to reach the broadest possible audience. Before doing this, Jim graduated Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude from Amherst College, winning Woodrow Wilson, Fulbright, and Ford Foundation fellowships. Woo! He holds 2 advanced degrees in English literature from UC Berkeley, where he specialized in Shakespeare and modern literary criticism, and he has a doctorate from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where he specialized in child development and social policy. In addition, he himself is an author and has written over 7 books and 100 articles for popular and professional magazines. His content, his thoughts, his leadership has appeared. He's appeared on things like Fatherhood USA, Good Morning America, The Today Show, and of course, Oprah. He is, as you may have guessed, a voracious reader. He also is down to earth with a humble sensibility about him. He sometimes describes himself as a lapsed academic. Jim Levine is one of these people who is leading, who is a huge leader in the book industry. So today we're going to head to his offices in New York City to talk about his 3 most formative books. Let's go. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Neil. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for chatting with me in the boardroom of LGR Literary. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did, and thank you for smuggling those yummy chocolates through customs at Canada.
Oh, you're welcome.
I hope they don't arrest you when this podcast goes live, finding out that you've smuggled coveted dark chocolate from Canada over the border.
I hope not as well. So we are in the boardroom of your literary agency on the 24th floor of a building in what area of New York is this?
This is Chelsea.
We're in Chelsea, and I'm looking out the window, and it's beautiful. I see just tall skyscrapers in every direction. Do you have a view of any notable buildings out these windows, or do you have to see the Empire State Building or anything?
You can see the Empire State Building. Actually, if we have the shades drawn right now because we have this construction going on right outside, but you can see the Empire State Building. Actually, even better than the famous building, and that's one of a couple, are the water towers.
Oh.
If you look carefully, basically this room the open windows are surrounded by water towers on many buildings. And what's interesting about this room is that the light, depending upon the time of day, hits the water towers in different ways. So when you walk in here, depending upon the time of day, it never feels like it's the same room. It feels like a really different room.
Wow. And why are there water towers? These are buildings have their own water tower. By the way, the beautiful thing about this recording is we're going to hear the radiator in the background.
Oh yeah, maybe we should do this in another.
No, I like it. It. That's part of it.
Okay.
And then our microphone's here, but I think it's I want people to feel where we are. So we're beside a clunky radiator.
We have a funky radiator, and we also have construction going on in our building right on the roof, right above us.
You could only add in some sirens. It'd be very perfect New York.
That may happen.
But tell me more about I'm sorry, but to ask about this, but I'm sorry, I'm kind of ignorant. Why are there water towers on tops of all these buildings?
That's where the water is stored. The apartment building I live in uptown on the Upper West Side has a water tower on top of it.
Really?
And that supplies water to the building.
So how come, I'm like, someone's going to email me afterwards, but I'm wondering why there's no water towers in any Toronto buildings.
That is a really good question, and I think that's. We'll have to both Google why are there water towers on buildings.
Someone's going to email me and either say one of two things: one, you're an idiot. Every Toronto building has a water tower, and you never noticed. Or two, you're an idiot. Post 19X, there is a new type of technology invented for water piping.
That's probably the case because actually the building that I live in that has a water tower was constructed in 1917. And a lot of these buildings around here, as we look out, probably it's the older buildings that have water towers. So there probably is some point at which a shift was made.
Yeah, it's beautiful. When you're in New York, sitting on top of a building like this, you just feel all these different histories around you, and that's really related to, I guess, your work. You help run one of the most prestigious literary agencies in the world.
Very kind of you to say.
I mean, I am surrounded by walls of books. I'm looking at Tom Brady's Face. I see Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. I see Hyperbole and a Half by Ali Broche. I see all of Patrick Lencioni's books, all of Chuck Klosterman's books. I'm just surrounded by, Ray Dalio's book. You guys are putting out books that are changing the world like you are, and they're beautiful. Now, let's jump into your 3 books. The 3 most formative books of your life, Jim. The first one is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey with the subtitle Powerful Lessons in Personal Change. It was published by Fireside, a division of Simon & Schuster, back in 1989 and has since sold over 25 million copies, making another literary agent very successful along the way. Categorized under success, character. This is the book where Stephen Covey presents a holistic, integrated, principle-centered approach for solving personal and professional problems. With penetrating insights and pointed anecdotes, Covey reveals a step-by-step pathway for living with fairness, integrity, honesty, and human dignity. Tell us about your relationship with 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Well, thanks for your interest. I don't remember when or how I heard about this, but I think as I look back on it, so this is of the 3 books we'll be talking about today. These are all books that I keep on my desk They're really companions to me, that they're so meaningful to me that I've kept them for years right next to me. Even if I don't refer to them every day or even every year, they're sort of guiding patron saints or spirits that inform my work.
Are they the only 3 books on your desk?
No, there are others, but
These ones are the fixtures.
These are the 3 sort of in terms of the ones I think about as sort of personally giving me. These are the 3 books. If you said to me, or if any person starting a career, my kids said to me, Dad, what are the 3 books that you think we should read that will be the most important in our careers? These are the 3 books I would give to them. What they all have in common, I think, in different ways, and what Covey first pointed out to me, was the importance of leading an intentional life, of realizing that you express your values with every choice you make, in every decision, big and small. And probably a lot of this just sounds very simplistic when you talk about it.
No,
but when one of the big insights for me, which I probably learned back then, but has informed my life ever since, is start with the end in mind. It's, what are your goals long term? Not what are you, for anything you're doing, not what do you want to get out of it the next 5 minutes or the next day, but why are you doing something? What's the meaning it has for you, and you in relationship to everybody else? And he articulated that with a set of other principles, but he also has an approach to time management.
Famous 2x2.
Right. Which, distinguishing between what's important and what's urgent. But it's this notion of really thinking about what is important.
Yeah, so just if I can interject just with the description for those listening, haven't seen it. It's a 2x2 matrix. On one side is urgent and not urgent, and the other side is important and not important. And the key insight is that we are spending our time doing things that are urgent but not necessarily important on a day-to-day basis. And how do we continually work towards finding the things that are important? And he even goes on to categorize this in detail. That's just interjection so we can picture it. Yeah.
And what I learned then, and this is related to keeping, focusing on the end, is the most important quadrant is the quadrant of important but not urgent. So many of us are, driven by having to be responsive to the things in our life, phone calls, meetings, crises, whatever. Those are important and have to be attended to. But what Covey made me realize was the importance of setting aside time every week, which I do, to think about what is important to me that's not urgent. When I'm not feeling pressed, when I'm not being reactive, when I'm thinking about being proactive, what are the things that I want to accomplish in my life? And I'm pretty disciplined about doing that.
How do you do it?
When
you say you do it every week, is it time and place? Or?
I tend to do it on the weekends, usually on a Sunday. I've actually refined this even further. I now do it on a daily basis, but in a kind of in my own version of it, but on a kind of a broader looking out. Yeah, I tend to try to think about what am I really trying to accomplish, and what do I want to achieve, and of all the things that are on my plate, what makes sense? Maybe there's things that I shouldn't be doing. Why am I doing them? Maybe I'm just doing them because I've done them in the past.
Exactly. And you do it so frequently too, Jim. And is it pen and paper? Is it quiet alone time? Is it how does that practice work?
It's alone. It's pen and paper. I find it really helps to write it down on a weekly basis, and on a daily basis, I have a journal that I keep, and I start every day. I've sort of refined Covey's approach to my own adaptation of this. I've sort of, over many years, have tried to really figure out what's most important, not just of activities, but sort of in an existential sense. Why am I here? What is my life? What do I want to accomplish in my life? And I boil it down to three things. One is to protect my family and those I love. Second is to develop other people, and that again is mainly related to my work, which I think of as helping to develop the talents of other people. And the third is to nurture, and that means to nurture myself so that I can do the other two, so that I've taken care of myself, that I can hopefully help develop others and protect my family. We were talking before you got in today you were remarking about my swimming.
Yeah.
So I try to part of my taking care of myself is I try to alternate a day of yoga and a day of swimming. And that physical activity to me is really important.
Absolutely. And you do that during the workday, right?
Yeah, midday. So while many literary agents, one often hears about agents going out to lunch, and that's a way of keeping up with editors. What I decided is those relationships are important to me, those meetings with editors, and this would go back to sort of a merge of Covey, be proactive, figure out what you want. I want those relationships, but I also want to be able to exercise. Mm-hmm. So I can be proactive in keeping up those relations, but doing them with a drink at the end of the day or a breakfast, because I know that my best time for exercising, and it's a refresher for me, is the middle of the day.
Yeah.
So I try to control my time without minimizing those relationships. And I find actually that sometimes when editors hear this, that I don't do lunch. I mean, I do lunch sometimes, but can we have a drink? And I'll explain why. They'll say, "Wow, I wish I could do that."
Exactly.
And my sort of response is, "Well, why can't you?"
Totally.
I
mean, I totally relate to that. I just read an article about the value of taking 1 or 2 meetings a day with someone you already know and like. You already know and like a boss or coworker, a partner like an editor here, and just say, hey, can we move this from in person to the phone? If we can do that, then we can both walk. The average person walks 5 kilometers an hour. So and if you just do that with 2 meetings a day, you get an extra 10 kilometers of walking. And so now what I do with meetings, all my meetings for the most part, I just do walking. And I've got the wireless headphones, which I still think make me look kind of silly. And so I've got the wired ones in my backup. So because they die, and I walk around and do like 5 or 10K a day. It's just an hour or two. It's just a meeting with people I like. And I find it also improves my mental clarity in the meeting.
Yep.
Because I'm not distracted by looking at my screen or a text message popping up or somebody walking by my desk or whatever. And it's so intentional and so beneficial.
Well, when I was your age, when I exercised, I would listen to audiobooks or the news because I wanted to be productive and multitask. And one of the things I've learned, what works better for me at this point in my life is during that exercise time, yoga and swimming, one of the reasons I like them both is because I'm not listening to anything else. I'm really focusing on my breath. So for me, it's those are very meditative practices. Meditation is another thing that I do every day. Mm-hmm. So I've, as part of, again, back to Covey and where we started, Covey really set me on the path to trying to live an intentional life and figuring out what is it that I really value, what is it that I really want, and thinking about the end and the goal and what it all means as opposed to just going about a series of tasks because they're in front of me or somebody else says I should do them.
And do you remember why you picked that book up or how it came into your hands?
I don't. I really don't.
Maybe because there's 25 million copies sold, it would have been hard not to.
It might have been.
Well, one of the, you mentioned, you've highlighted 2 or 3 of the 7 habits already in terms of being proactive. And so another one of them is maybe related to the next book, which is Finding Win-Win. And your second book is Getting to Yes. The subheadline, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In, by Roger Fisher and William Ury. And for the revised editions, Bruce Patton. This book was published by Penguin. Oh, no, Houghton Mifflin. Houghton Mifflin in 1981, then published by Penguin in 1983, another edition in 1991, a third edition in 2011. I can see this edition is already on its 19th printing. To say this book has done well would be another understatement. This is the book giving you, it says in the back, the secret to successful negotiation. One of the key business texts of the modern era, Getting to Yes has helped millions of people learn a better way to negotiate. Sounds like negotiation is a really big part of your role, the role of a literary agent. Tell us about your relationship with this book.
Well, this is again, this is a book that I think of as essential to the way I live my life, and get one of the co-author of the book, William Ury. I did not know when he published the book. I wasn't a literary agent. One of the great pleasures of my life is that I now represent William Ury.
Oh, nice.
And recently we did a book called...
Don't tell him I said his name wrong. Although you'd probably say mine wrong too, I imagine.
I recently helped him develop, and we sold a book called Getting to Yes with Yourself and Other Worthy Opponents.
Wow. I like that.
I stumbled across I read this book. I was long before I was a literary agent. I was an academic. But, reaching agreement with people is something everybody does in their own whole life, whether it's with one's kids or one's spouse or partner or, it permeates our lives. And when I read about this book, it was at a time, and then there were many other books about negotiation. There was a period, and there was a guy named, I think it was Herb Cohen, and it was kind of negotiation was seen as a sport in which you win by being a bully, and you try to take advantage of people. And when I heard about this book, it seemed to have a different approach that just seemed much more comfortable to me. Negotiation until then, which to me it's had this kind of notion of, how do you get the best of people? How do you take advantage? It just felt wrong to me, and it gave negotiation a kind of a really seemed like it was just dirty business or something. And then I heard about this book, which basically was saying, look, we interact with people all the time, and I may have something I want, the other person has something they want. But what we too often get locked into is advocating for our positions, for the thing we want, as opposed to thinking about, and this is back to Stephen Covey, what's the goal? Aside from my position, what's the thing that I'm arguing for? Why am I arguing for this? Maybe there are alternative ways to reach that end goal. And it opened up a model to me that just felt intuitively natural and comfortable to me as a person. It just seemed like, of course, that's the way. It's consistent with, don't argue for positions. Try to understand first what you want, and try to understand and be respectful of what the other person wants. And if you're really serious about doing that, you often discover that you really don't have an argument, that actually you have a solution right in front of you. Bill often illustrates it, tells a story about two sisters who have to split one orange, and they're fighting over it, and the parent comes in and says, okay, well, I'm going to divide this orange down the middle, and that's the fair way to do it. We'll split it. You each get half. And each sister gets half, and neither is satisfied. Why not? Because one sister only wanted the orange peel, and the other sister only wanted the meat of the orange, the pulp. If they had identified their goals in advance, I want the skin, I want the pulp, they could have solved it themselves without having their parent come in Solomonic fashion, dividing the orange in two, coming up with a less satisfactory solution for each of them.
It's amazing. You're talking about chapter 3, I think. Focus on interests, not positions.
Interests, not positions.
And that's a great example. That's from the book as well. And then there's this one, which I love. It's just the opening paragraph of the chapter. Consider Mary Parker Follett's story of two men quarreling in a library. One wants the window open, and the other wants it closed. They bicker back and forth about how much to leave it open. A crack, halfway, 3/4. No solution satisfies them both. Enter the librarian. She asks one why he wants the window open. To get some fresh air, he says. She asks the other why he wants the window closed. To avoid the draft, he says. After thinking for a moment, she opens wide a window in the next room, bringing in fresh air without a draft. It's like highlighted that part of the book. I was like, I mean, it's the only question it begs, of course, is like, if only every negotiation was that simple. But you're saying, in your experience, and you do a lot more of this than almost anyone I can think of, you're saying, no, there often is examples, because they give another example here of a house being sold for people fighting over the price. Another person says, if you take off a piece of the land and add a lien and a sellback option, like you're adding in tons of value and making the negotiation simple.
I think every negotiation should start, and at least the way I try to practice is by trying to identify interests. And one of the hard parts of this is identifying your own interests. Or with clients we represent, you and I had a discussion earlier today. In fact, and at one point you looked at me, you thought maybe I was distracted, I think, or I got a lot of other clients, something on my mind. And really the thought cloud above my head, what I was puzzling with is, I'm hearing competing interests from Neil. I'm trying to sort out for myself what are his real priorities, because I can't serve him as an agent unless I truly understand what his priorities are, what his main interests are.
Yeah.
Because that's the way that I can help best serve his interests. And
Totally.
if I think I know the interest, but I'm not quite sure, then I'm not going to end up in it's really important to clarify that. And it's something that it's very hard often for clients of ours, but I think people in any business to identify, what do you really want?
I mean, that is an ultimate question. I need to getting to yes with myself. And other, veritable foes, worthy opponents. Michael Bungay Stanier asked this question a lot in the coaching habit. What do you want? And that question should always be mulled over, maybe on Sunday with a notepad and pen, or maybe just through conversation. And part of the conversation we had, but also that people have in negotiations, is clarifying and articulating interests when they haven't already done so.
And I think you just said something that is very important to me. So figuring out what you want, I don't think of as a solo activity. I think we figure this out in dialogue with people. Often it's very hard to figure out exactly what we want, and we need to discover it. But the same is true in negotiation. Negotiation is, I look at it as problem solving. I mean, you want to figure out how to get to the place where, to the extent possible, everybody's interests are satisfied. It's not always possible. But if you're open-minded, it's more like we have another client, Michael Wheeler, is a professor at Harvard Business School.
I took 2 of his courses. Fantastic professor.
And he writes about the art of negotiation and thinks of negotiation as being more like jazz music, and you have to improvise. And the way you come to, like a jazz musician, and interestingly, my son is a jazz musician, good jazz musicians listen very carefully to what their bandmates are playing or saying with their instrument. I think the work of people who are good at negotiation is trying to really listen and be attuned to what the other person is saying, because sometimes they can help the other person, the quote adversary, discovers something that they want that they didn't even realize they wanted.
Totally. Or that they didn't even place value on it.
Right. So
and while injecting, it sounds like through these conversations, a healthy dose of it's okay to not know.
Absolutely.
Because I think, for me, I typically, when I'm asked what I want and I don't know, I feel shame associated with that. I'm like embarrassed that I don't know what I want. I'm myself. Who else would know if I don't? But really, maybe this book, but also through this conversation, I'm really, it's okay to not know. It's a journey, and interests also change over time.
And sort of back to the work of a literary agent, I think one of the things we do, one of the things that I enjoy the most, and hopefully we help our clients do, is go through that process of figuring it out. What is it they want to have on the page? Because it's not clear all the time. In fact, most of the time at the beginning, and you're really working to discover what the work is together by having a conversation about it, by an iterative process of putting something forth, getting feedback on it. And I don't know how it happens, but I've done this long enough that if you learn to trust in the process, you just realize that if you're patient and persistent and sort of have an optimistic and kind of good intent about things, you reach the point where things sort of do somehow get into focus. Mm-hmm. Or they get to the point where you realize, that really wasn't a good idea. But it's a much more, so you got to go through you have to be willing to go through a lot of not knowing and the discomfort of uncertainty to get to the point where you can reach something you feel pretty good about.
Yeah. Who should read Getting to Yes?
Boy, I think everybody should read Getting to Yes. I just think it is important for no matter what business you're in. I think it's a book that anybody who's in an intimate relationship, I think, spouses, partners, I think my marriage, and it's a long one now in our 51st year, I like to think it's better because I have this sort of perspective and can try not to get myself just locked into a position. And if my wife seems to be locked into a position, both sitting back and saying, wait a minute, let's just step back. Mm-hmm. What's the goal here? What are we trying to achieve?
Right.
Can really help.
Yeah. We talked about saying what you want and articulating that to yourself. I have a good friend, Fred, who was in New York City visiting with his wife, Jen, and they were thinking about getting to Newark Airport to catch a flight. And they said, hey, should we take a cab or should we take the subway? And the subway's obviously much cheaper, but much more inconvenient. We've got our big luggage. But what do you want to do? And she's like, I don't know. What do you want to do? I mean, it's cheaper. Yeah, I guess it's cheaper if we do the subway. And they kind of just sort of took the subway to the Newark Airport, however you get there. And with the luggage lumping around, they finally arrive at the airport. And one of them says to the other, sort of exasperated, like, I wish we'd just taken a cab. And the other one says, that's what I wanted to do too. And so they've, from this experience, invented a game for themselves in their relationship, which I would like to share with you because Leslie and I sometimes use it as well. It's called 1, 2, 3, say what you want. And the way this game works is you go 1, 2, 3, and then you must forcibly and clearly articulate literally what you want at the exact same time so that there isn't the humming and hawing and the what do you want, what do you want? It's just like, boom, I want Thai, you want Japanese? Good. That we know, and then we can decide. And I know it's a small point, and it's not related to Getting to Yes, absolutely, but it's just like this idea of what we want. We just got to talk about it in order to get things done properly. Yeah. Imagine they'd just taken the cab to the airport like they both wanted to, but I'll both assume the other did not.
Well, that's a great story, a great example.
Yeah.
And it actually goes back to, Covey again. Covey would argue you need to be proactive, state what you want, and then trust that other people will enter into dialogue with you to state what they want.
And some people might even sprinkle a little bit of the universe will conspire to make it happen. Like some people will add a little bit of that. Interjection, by the way, on negotiating, I have not read, but I've heard is also really good, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Do you know that book?
I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
Okay, a good to read for both of us.
But that's kind of like, cutting the orange in half is splitting the difference.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a fantastic title, right? Yeah. Because you think right away, let's just split the difference. It's something we all say. So let's transition now to your third and final book, which is Search Inside Yourself by Chade Meng Tan. Its subtitle is The Unexpected Path to Achieving Success, Happiness, and World Peace, with forewords by John Kabat-Zinn and Daniel Goleman. That's impressive. Chade-Meng Tan is Google's jolly good fellow, which nobody can deny. As one of Google's earliest engineers, Meng helped build Google's first mobile search service, and then did an 8-year stint in engineering and 2 years in Google's people team. Now he is literally labeled the jolly good fellow, whose goal is to enlighten minds, open hearts, and create world peace. This book is an output of the groundbreaking course he and some fellow team members created inside Google called Search Inside Yourself. And Jim, it's also the only book I've ever seen in my life where His Holiness the Dalai Lama's blurb has been relegated to the back of the book. Seconded to Eric Schmidt, the executive chairman of Google's, maybe more appropriate for the Google book, on the cover. Can you tell us about your relationship with Search Inside Yourself?
Yeah, this is, again, another book that I highly recommend. It's been a very important book in my life. And I like to think of it this way. This is a book about the inward journey. The two books we've talked about before, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. In a sense, that's about the outward journey. It's really about success, looking forward in your career, achieving things. The big lesson was start with the end in mind. Getting to Yes was about the interpersonal journey, about dealing with others as you try to achieve your longer-term objectives. And what I learned, and only about 7 or 8 years ago, was the importance of a third dimension to this, which was the journey within, to search inside myself, aside from the interpersonal, which is important, and having the long-term, sort of objective on goals. That being at peace with oneself is really important and not easy to do, and just to stay still and focused. We represent a number of authors who have written about meditation. This is really a book about meditation and mindfulness. And they hadn't clicked with me, even though we represent them. My colleagues represented them. I had even taken a workshop on meditation, and you had to sit for 20 minutes still, or an hour, I can't remember, but it just felt too forced for me. I read about this book, and again, it's kind of like when I heard about Getting to Yes, it sounded, that sounds interesting, that sounds more like me. And what I like about this book is that it's not pretentious about meditation or mindfulness.
Yeah.
It's saying,
it's got these really funny, down-to-earth cartoons throughout of it.
Yeah, it's both of the forewords by Dan Goleman and John Kabat-Zinn, who are also favorite authors of mine, warn you that there's a lot of slapstick humor in this book, and not to be put off by it. There is a lot of that. But Meng is basically saying mindfulness it's an attitude. It's a way of being in the world. And it's not something that requires for you to sit for 20 minutes with your legs crossed on a mat in the morning. It's something you can do when you're walking from the office to the bathroom. It's something you can do when you're walking down the street. It's something you can do at any time of day for any duration you want. And it was just such an eye-opener for me. And I started practicing meditation in a very regular way. And again, I meditate not just once a day. It's sort of something I really do throughout the day, work into my day. I do it in the morning when I get up, but I do it...
Certain type, or is it
when I'm walking, when I'm, sometimes at the office, I'll just take a break.
So sorry to interject, if you are meditating while walking, are you referring to a what are you doing in your mind?
So you'll focus, for example, on one part of your body. You could be focusing on your breath, or you could be just focusing on, I'm going to focus on my left knee. But it's the same notion of clearing your mind of other thoughts. Now, when you're walking, obviously you have to be aware of where you're walking to. You don't want to walk into another person.
It's New York City here.
It's New York City. But it is actually possible to do this, and it just it's made me realize the most important thing. It's very simple and very, in a sense, and very hard to do. Is what is being alive? It's breathing, and I often think, well, if I couldn't do anything, if I were paralyzed, and all I could do was breathe in and out and focus on my breath, would that be sufficient? And actually, it's not a very easy thing to do. Maybe if that's all you could do, maybe you would find it was sufficient. Maybe you would find it was actually blissful. Certainly, it would be different from the way we go around reacting to Facebook and Twitter and being pinged in every direction. But it's a practice. It's a practice in the sense of something that is a discipline and something that you have to practice. It's not something you ever achieve and then you've reached the end state. So it's just become really a regular part of my life, and one that I find it's sort of amazing in retrospect that I think that I existed without doing it.
Yeah. Because
I just find it so fulfilling in a way that's hard to describe, except that it makes me just feel more. It helps me slow down. It helps me achieve the other two things.
Yeah. Well, there's so much research on meditation that talks about how it increases activity in your prefrontal cortex. You go from quote unquote living in the washing machine to looking at the washing machine. From a neuroscience perspective, we know your problems zoom out of the front of your head.
So it's become sort of, in a sense, it's the ground zero. It's the last book that I've chosen, but it's sort of the ground zero for the others. It's the basis for helping me with the interpersonal relationships and helps me with more of the outward achievement, whatever I'm working on, to just keep it in perspective.
Yeah. How did you get this book? Or how did
I read it. So I represent Eric Schmidt at Google and some other people at Google. I read about this book. I don't represent Chade-Ming Tan, but I read about the book, and when it was published, went out and got it. It just totally clicked with me, and I had the good fortune to then be able to arrange a dinner with Chade-Ming Tan, which was really, really quite wonderful.
And kudos to you for bumping into the gigantic amorphous world of meditation multiple times for finding the one, as you put it, to click with you, because I think a lot of people find that a really amorphous industry and don't know where to start. So you've provided what I think a lot of people would say is an accessible route.
Yeah,
I mean, it's probably why Headspace is so popular and things like that. You're saying this book is like a down-to-earth guide.
Yeah, for me, and what I would say is, for anybody, I would say there are many good books out there. Just find the one that works for you. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's one right way, but when this sort of clicks for you, it's very profound, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Now, we are going to transition from the 3 books to the final few fast money round questions. There is no money actually involved, unfortunately, but I got the name from like Family Feud, the ending of put 20 seconds on the clock. So, number 1, Jim, you read a ton. You're in the book industry. You must have tons of books. How do you organize your books? If I were to come into your home bookshelf or shelves, what's the organizing principle?
If you came into our home, well, there are different organizing principles. Here in the agency, if you walk out into the other room, you will see one copy, the original copy of every book we've represented. We were running out of room, so we downsized. Many books came out in hardback and paperback, and then mass market paperback. So we've just retained the one original version to make room for other books. But those are arranged alphabetically.
Alphabetically by title?
By author.
Oh, by author. Yeah.
At home, you would find an apartment where I would guess the main motif, the main mode of decoration is books. Each room having its own method of organizing. So in my home study, I have different sections. So, for example, there's a want to read in the next 2 months section. There's a big section on popular science. I read a lot of popular science. There's a big section devoted to this study I'm doing of the hidden role of the agent. So it's a lot of books about publishing, the history of publishing, literary marketplace. There's a section of books on music. So those are categories. If you looked in our bedroom, my wife's an avid reader too. She has lots of fiction. And on my night table, is where I keep poetry. And I also keep John Kabat-Zinn's, excuse me, Wherever You Go, There You Are. Is that the one I'm thinking, or what's the, do I have the right title? It's a big fat book. I think it's Wherever You Go, There You Are. In paperback with beautiful torn paper edges that I think of as kind of my Bible. And I'll dip into it and it's a book that's making the same point over and over, which is about being present, being mindful. But I can dip into anywhere, and it just sort of reminds me at the end of my day that's kind of what it's all about.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing how you organize your books. It's fascinating. The next question is, what is your white whale book? Or what book have you been wanting to read the longest, but for whatever reason you just never have?
I would say it is the book about the white whale. It is Moby Dick.
Is it?
Yeah, it really is. So I'm in a monthly book group that we've had for 15 or 20 years with a bunch of friends, and we meet every month, read a different book, have dinner together. People take turns cooking. And Moby Dick is a book that we keep putting off for the summer project. And I think this summer it may make it. It's a book, I don't know how I escaped reading it in college as an English major, but somehow I did. And so many people I know, friends and colleagues, have said they just find it one of the most fascinating books they've ever read.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why it doesn't get removed or tossed from the to-be-read pile, but it keeps getting postponed, as we will. We all have books like that. What's your favorite bookstore, if you have one, and why?
I would say the Strand here in New York, which has, I think their sign says something like 5 miles a book. It's known for being a used bookstore.
Is it 5 miles? I feel like it's 26 miles.
Maybe 26. You may have meant for 26 miles of books. Yeah. What does the Strand say?
18 miles of books.
My favorite bookstore is the Strand, which is famous for having 18 miles of books. I knew it growing up mostly as a used bookstore. It's now has new books as well, and it has quite a extensive selection of art books. But it's just a wonderful store to go in and browse and discover books you've heard of but never got to reading. You know, it's kind of like a library in a sense. Yeah. I love libraries too, just to browse in and discover books. But the Strand is a really special place.
Thanks, Jim. And then I guess to close off, you've achieved an incredible amount of success in this industry over a long time. Lots of people listening are aspiring to be writers or maybe literary agents or get involved in publishing in some capacity. What would be a nugget or two, it doesn't be the nugget or two, but a nugget or two of words of advice or wisdom you would leave as we close off the show?
I guess the advice I'd give has to do with whatever career, especially a young person. I've done so many different things in my life. Before this career, I was an academic, taught college, was a college vice president, But in my past before that, I was a preschool teacher. I was a daycare director in a large public housing project. I worked for a foundation. I've written books. I've just done lots of different things. And I guess my main advice is to, in fact, one of the best books I ever read was called Go Hire Yourself an Employer. And its advice was sort of try to figure out, it's very consistent with everything I've been saying, try to figure out what it is that you enjoy, what fulfills you in life, and try to find a place that'll go let you do that. It's not about a particular job. It's really, think about a set of skills. What are the types of interactions you like to have? I can imagine, I love my work. I sort of think I've sort of fallen into the absolute perfect work for me. It's a continuing liberal arts education. I love the intellectual challenge. I love working with people, helping to develop them. I really like the deal-making parts of it. I like promoting books. But, I think, well, are there other roles that I could have? Yes, this isn't the one thing that would let me do all those things. There's probably, hundreds of jobs or careers I could have had that would let me fulfill those things that I like doing. I just don't know about them. And the problem growing up is that so many of us get railroaded or think we've got to become a lawyer, a doctor, a writer, a this, or that by a certain age, and that's what will define our success. And I just think there's much greater opportunity and latitude and potential for enjoyment if you kind of can let yourself stumble along and figure out what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, and then sort of do an exploration to identify the many different roles that would let you express your best self.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Let yourself stumble along and find what you're good at. Wise words from the wise man, that is the incredible Jim Levine. Hey everyone, it's just me. It's just Neil again, back in my basement with my backpack full of wires, listening to and reflecting on Jim's always intentional and always thoughtful words. A huge thank you to Jim Levine for this great conversation and for adding to our list of the top 1,000 3 more books. Jim Levine has given us today number 903, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Can you guys believe it took 100 books to get to that book? That is a mammoth. That is like a big one. What other gigantic books have we not got to yet? That'll be interesting to see over the years. Number 902, Getting to Yes by William Ury, U-R-Y. And number 901, Search Inside Yourself by Chade Meng Tan. These so epitomize Jim. He does search inside himself. He does get to yes. And he displays and demonstrates so many habits of highly effective people. It is a pleasure and a joy and just a random instance of life, I guess, that I got to know Jim, and I get the privilege of working with him. So Jim, if you're listening all the way down here, thank you so much for everything you do on behalf of readers, authors, in the publishing industry. You do great work, and we so appreciate you. And now, if you made it to this far in the podcast, you are officially welcome back to the end of the podcast club. Yes, this is one of 2 clubs that we have for 3 books. Okay, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to reveal a little something. You know how we have 2 clubs? One club is the end of the podcast club. You talk directly to me. You leave me your voicemails, your reviews, your letters. Then I talk directly to you. And then we have the secret club. I don't always say much about the secret club other than you got to call this number, 1-833-READ-A-LOT. You got to get a special thing. You got to put that special thing in a special place. You got to then get more instructions. You then have to do something. You got to send something through the mail. It's complicated on purpose because we only want super passionate, crazy 3 Books fans to jump through a million hoops to join our analog only fan club. But guess what? I'm going to reveal something to you. This is kind of funny. It's like, guess who's in the Papercut Club? Guess who's in the super secret fan club? Guess who's in it? Jim Levine. Jim Levine is in the club. Okay. I don't talk about the secret club that much, but isn't it so appropriate? And don't you hear that in his voice, the amount of love and thought he has with how he lives? Okay. Now, where were we? Well, we're in the end of the podcast club. Neil, don't get confused about which club we're in right now. We're in the end of the podcast club. This is the club where you leave me voicemails. So let's go to the phones now.
Hi, Neil. It's Carrie Gormley calling from Wilmington, Delaware. And I wanted to congratulate you on being one of the top Apple podcasts for 2018. I also wanted to respond to the email you received from the listener in Canada back on episode 27, that incredible episode you did with Robin Goodfellow, your favorite bartender. The woman who wrote you the email was Canadian, and I guess she gave you her name, which was very brave of her, I want to point out. And she had given you some, I don't know if constructive feedback is the right word for it, but she had given you some feedback and had pointed out, which was interesting, some of the things you had done and not really going deeper with some of your idols about some of their thoughts. And I wanted just to respond to that, where I think you actually do. Early on, you interviewed Seth Godin, and he was talking about writing books for ladies and gentlemen, and somehow the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy came up, and you said, hey, we don't have any book shame here. Yes, it was a bestseller, but no book shame. So I felt like you did actually question one of your idols. So I just want to say there that I think you're doing a great job. You do go deeper. I've always thought that's what makes you such a great interviewer, is you ask the questions that you don't know the answers to. It may seem like a dumb question, but you answer it anyway. Thank you for all that you're doing. Can't wait to read your new book, and keep on keeping on. Bye, Neil.
Thank you so much to Carrie from Delaware. And by the way, did everyone else just hear like a smile while Carrie's voicemail played? Like I could hear her smiling the whole time. It reminds me of when I was back at Harvard Business School, one of my professors there, Frances Fry, taught this incredible course called Managing Service Operations. And she always told these interesting stories that she discovered while researching case studies. And she told us this one story about Southwest Airlines. And at the time, Southwest, was heralded as this incredible company with more profits than anyone else and higher customer service than anybody else, even though they were doing something very different. One plane, quick turns, no assigned seating, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, how did they get such great service? And the professor, Frances Fry, said, well, it's because they hire in a really interesting way. She said they put, and this is anecdotal, okay, so don't quote me, but it's anecdotal. She's like, they put people in circles and they say, can everyone stand up and share your most embarrassing moment of your life? Like that's the group interview question. Interestingly enough, people do it. And what they're looking for is everyone else's body language. They are looking for people who are grimacing and are showing empathy and concern about this person kind of charged with this super difficult task. Because what they were really searching for, Frances Fry told us, was something called resting smiles. That phrase then entered my brain, my vernacular, my mind as something I always thought about. I'm like, resting smiles? What's a resting smile? A smile is someone who smiles naturally while in a resting position. They aren't trying to smile. Nothing happy has happened. They aren't telling you a joke. They didn't hear anything funny. In a resting state, their face defaults to a smile. It's a very hard thing to find. As you can imagine, not many people have one. I don't even think I do. I don't know anyone that does off the top of my head. But Carrie from Delaware, I got a sense you're a resting smile person, right? Even when you hear a critical letter, you're resting over to the smiley part of me challenging Seth. That's great. And I need to get better at that. I do agree with, like, I want to be able to challenge someone, even though they have a big name, but I want to do so in a way that is gracious and kind. And I'm learning from people on how to do that. A great person who does this, by the way, is Mel Robbins. If you don't know her, check her out online. She will be a future guest on 3 Books, I am sure. I'm sure. And she's about to launch a daytime talk show called The Mel Robbins Show. So she's going to be bigger. She's a white Oprah, okay? I'm not the first person who've said that. She is like amazing. And she challenges people in a really tactful and kind way. I think that's the secret. How do you challenge those in a positive way, okay? A growth for many of us, especially me. Thank you so much to Carrie. Now, let's truck over to the letter of the chapter. And this letter is coming from somebody called The Biggest Continent. Okay. The letter came over iTunes. Hey, Neil, I can't tell you enough about how much I've been loving your podcast. I found it a few months ago while scrolling through Apple's recommended podcasts, and I haven't missed an episode since. I found myself even saying the final farewell out loud along with you. From Neil Pasricha and myself, you are what you eat and you are what you read. And then she inserted that like monkey holding its eyes emoji thing. During the introduction of several episodes, you mentioned that this podcast will uncover the 1,000 most formative books over 15 years. I stopped to think about that for the first time yesterday. And I realized I will be 40 years old when this podcast concludes. As I'm sure this podcast will grow and change over time, it will be fun to see how I change and grow over time as your podcast does the same. I am excited to continue to grow alongside 3 books. To conclude, I've got a quick question. You mentioned in one episode that you know Rich Roll. I've been listening to his podcast for years, and I think he is absolutely crazy inspiring. I'd love to see an episode of 3 books uncovering Rich Roll's 3 most formative books. Again, thanks so much for all you put into this podcast. It is truly a gift, and congrats on the Apple Podcast Award. Hooray, The Biggest Continent. You know what? So much in there. Rich Roll is a superstar. For those that don't know, check out the RRP, the Rich Roll podcast. He's had guests like Yuval Noah Harari, author of Sapiens. He's had Russell Brand. He has had Lance Armstrong. But it's not just the celebs, as we talked about before. It's also he is pulling out stories from the world that you would never have heard of. I listened to one about a woman. I can't remember her name. She was like a pastor, but a really progressive and like really like kind of provocative sort of church pastor. And when you listen to her on Rich's show, you're like, oh my God, I could listen to her all day. Partly because Rich pulls it out of people. And I have a good friend who just did a podcast tour of like all the hugest podcasts in the world. I won't name them all, but you probably know them all. And I asked him, hey, which was your favorite? And he said, oh, by far and away, the Rich Roll podcast. And I said, why? And he said, he asked the hardest questions. Rich is super articulate. And he's also the author of a great book called Finding Ultra, a bestselling book exploring his kind of challenges of going into middle age and deciding, of course, to become a vegan ultramarathon triathlete Superman because of that. So I will take the challenge. I will try to get the Rich Roll on 3 books. Wish me luck, and I'll report back, okay, over time. Thank you for the letter. And now it's time for the word of the chapter.
If they had identified their goals in advance, I want the skin, I want the pulp, they could have solved it themselves without having their parent come in Solomonic fashion, dividing the orange in 2.
Yes, indeed, it is Solomonic. What was that Jim just dropped on us like nothing? Solomonic, Solomonic. Say it for us, dictionary lady. Here we go.
Solomonic.
Dictionary man, my apologies. Solomonic. Never heard it before in my life. Had no idea what he was talking about. Clearly, I didn't stop to ask that one. Need to get better. Definition: marked by notable wisdom, reasonableness, or discretion, especially under trying circumstances. Okay, so I go over to Wikipedia then, and Solomonic has one of those things, it's like there's multiple Solomonics. There's the Solomonic column, which is like a column that looks like a corkscrew, okay? But then there's the Solomonic wisdom. I think that's what Jim is talking about, based on King Solomon of Israel. Who is King Solomon of Israel? Okay, well, Solomon, Solomon, was, and he's also called Jedediah, was, according to the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the Quran, and the Hadiths, a fabulous, wealthy, and wise king of Israel who succeeded his father, King David. His reign was approximately 970 BCE to 931 BCE. Okay, so we're talking 3,000 years old here. Solomon is the subject of, and there's all kinds of stuff. According to the Talmud, he's one of the 48 prophets. According to the Quran, he's one of the major prophets. According to the Hebrew Bible, he's the builder of the first temple. This guy is big, okay? In the New Testament, he's portrayed as a teacher of wisdom, excelled by Jesus. He's arrayed in glory. In non-biblical circles, Solomon also came to be known as a magician and an exorcist. Oh, interesting. So this guy is like a huge, big, gigantically important dude from 3,000 years ago that people like me knew nothing about. His name is conjured up into things like Solomonic wisdom because he was evidently super wise. Okay, so Jim, makes sense since you were super wise for you to use the phrase Solomonic, like nothing, like water, because that's the air you breathe, baby. Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening to chapter 34 of 3 books. This has been a pleasure and a joy. I love our connecting hearts on this incredible pilgrimage that we are taking together. And remember, until next time on chapter 35, are you ready for it? Here it comes. You are what you eat, and you very much are what you read. Thank you so much for listening, and keep turning that page. Take care.